Hello YouTube, Sound Dude here. I was going to make a little review on some tea, but I thought, I probably need to give some background information. First of all, before we start, I got a confession to make. Now, normally I'm not a snob about most things. In fact, while I like a good beer, my favorite brand is Cold and Free. So I'm certainly not a beer snob, although I do appreciate a good beer. Now, when it comes to tea, I am a snob. Tea bags are just gross. I mean, they're just the sweepings off the floor of the where they've dried the tea, and you're never going to get really good cups of tea from bags, especially here in the U.S. Now, the better brands in the U.K., that's not necessarily the case. But what I want to talk about today is a type of tea you may not have heard about called Puerh Tea. It's from China, and it comes in all kinds of shapes, sizes, flavors. One big difference with Puerh Tea is, if you know anything about tea, that your typical, especially good quality loose tea, is what they call two leaves and a tip. So it comes off of a tea bush, and it's the final two leaves at the end of the stem and the tip of the stem. And the tea bushes are about, maybe 3 to 4 feet high, and they're harvested that way and kept that size. Now, here's one very different thing about Puerh Tea. Puerh Tea comes from tea bushes that are either gone wild or they've been allowed to mature into decent sized trees. And I mean 15 to 20 foot or larger trees. So the leaves aren't tiny little leaves like you'd get about that big from your normal dried tea, but they're going to be full-size leaves off of a tree. And it's a completely different taste. Now, I'm going to probably murder the Chinese pronunciations of stuff, so I'll mention the Chinese name, but then from then on, I'll just use the accepted English term for it. Two main categories of Puerh Tea: what they call Sheng, which is raw tea, or Shu, which is ripe tea. Now, what's the difference? This type of tea, like other things like wine or pipe tobaccos, improves with age. And in fact, it improves a lot with age. Some of this tea that's 30, 40, 50 years old can fetch unbelievable prices because of its age. Now, because it improves with age, people have been experimenting with, well, how can we make it age quicker? And that's what ripe tea is. They'll take the raw tea, and once it's dried, they'll throw water on it, allow it to ferment, and go through some other processes for a few months, and then end up with a tea that they'll call ripe tea, that's been processed and supposedly has artificial aging induced in it. Does it have the same result? Not really. But it's a different type of flavor, and a lot of people like the ripe teas. Personally, I prefer the raw tea. So let's see what this stuff looks like. Now, if you're used to loose tea or tea in bags, this thing's going to look quite a bit different from the get-go. This is what's normally called a tong of tea. It's wrapped in bamboo leaves. Let's try one out of here. And it normally comes packaged like this. It's been dried and compressed into a disc. And this is called a bing, and it's the most common format you'll find this. And one of these weighs around 360 grams. And let's look at one that's already opened. This is the same tea, and it's been opened. And you can see the leaves that have been compressed and pushed into there. And there's some light and dark, but it's definitely a type of green tea. A quick aside, if you're not familiar with the difference between black tea and green tea, it's all the same plant. It's Camellia sinensis, and black tea is processed. It's actually pan-fired, or in some way heat is applied to stop the any of the enzyme processes going on. Well, green tea is just the leaves and they're dried. There's no other further processing going on, but it's the exact same plant. Different flavors of different tea just are caused, much like grapes producing wine, stuff grown in different areas are going to have a completely different flavor. Like an Assam tea is going to have a totally different flavor than a Darjeeling tea, although they're essentially leaves of the same plant. And the same thing here. Some of the things are introduced into how they were dried, the age in which they were, how long they've been around, aged. So that's what one of these looks like. Now, what other formats does this stuff come in? Well, all kinds. This is a ripe tea. It's in a bag here, and it's pressed into a melon shape, where it's half round, and then the base is hollow, where this paper is pushed into. Some other formats you can get this in. This is a ripe tea that's been opened. If you can see the color of that, it's much darker than the previous tea we looked at. And the ripe teas are generally brown to brownish black in color. And the tea they make is also going to be of that color. But some of the real odd teas you can get is, this is one. It's kind of fallen apart, so I don't really want to pull it out of the bag. I don't know if you can see that. But it's tea that's been pressed into a basket. And there's a basket woven around it. And then there's bamboo leaves across the top. There's teas where it's pressed into a brick. Now, a lot of these have got quite a bit of history that I don't really know all of it about, but they're pressed into bricks in these shapes, and why they're compressed was for easy transport for trade. So the old Silk Route, people from China would be leaving with bricks and bricks of tea to use as currency or trade with their partners. Another kind of strange one is, here's a piece of bamboo. The bamboo is packed full of the tea, and then some heat's applied to the bamboo, and then the end corked up. And so that's full of tea, and again, it's Puerh tea, just processed a little bit differently. Now, this is probably the strangest one of all. It sounds kind of gross, but it actually tastes really good. This is tea that's packed. It was all packed inside, and then these little lines are from wires that were around it because it was all wired up, and then allowed to age. This is actually a grapefruit. So the grapefruit, the fruit was taken out, then it was packed full of the tea, and then it was all wired up and then allowed to age. It actually tastes pretty good. It looks kind of weird, but despite that, it tastes quite good. Now, the proper way to make this tea is in a Yixing teapot. If you can see the size of it in my hand, and this is a larger one. Most of them are quite small. And a Yixing teapot is just pretty much one serving. But this is made from a traditional, with a purple clay found in China. And this one happens to be red in color. And generally you dedicate a pot to a type of tea. Like you're only going to use ripe tea in one pot, or you'd only use raw tea in another pot. So the flavors don't ghost the pot. Boy, that kind of sounds familiar with something else, doesn't it? Okay, so I've got a number of these, and these can be really expensive. Artisan ones can be quite pricey. So that's going to give a little background on what Puerh Tea is all about. And the next video, I'll do a review on one of the teas. If you want to find more information, if you do a search on the interwebs, there's quite a few groups of aficionados of this type of tea, and you'll find that there's a whole nerd community that is into this kind of stuff. But you may not have ever heard it, and I'm happy to give you a little quick overview of it. So until the next review video, Sound dude out.